Let's talk about 1956. It was a year when one single event managed to completely flip the global balance of power on its head. The Suez Crisis. It wasn't just some small regional squabble. This was the moment the old colonial empires, Great Britain and France, were basically knocked off their pedestals in front of the whole world. And it was the moment that the real new superpowers of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union, stepped right into the spotlight.
So how did this all kick off? Well, it all started with one single defiant act. An act that was centered on what was and still is the most important man-made waterway in the entire world. And it triggered a massive international showdown almost overnight.
Picture this. It's July 26, 1956. Egypt's really charismatic president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, is up on a stage, speaking to this massive cheering crowd, and he announces that Egypt is taking over the Suez Canal Company. Now, this wasn't just some business deal. No, this was a direct challenge to 100 years of European control.
And for Britain and France, you have to understand, this was a huge deal. They had pretty much run the canal for decades. It was their economic lifeline, the main artery pumping oil from the Middle East to Europe. So Nasser's move wasn't just a hit to their bank accounts, it was a direct assault on their status as world powers. But look, an explosion like this doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? The Suez Canal had been a powder keg of tensions for a long time. To really get what happened, we need to rewind a bit and look at all the forces that were at play way before Nasser ever made that speech.
So you've got this perfect storm brewing, and it's really made up of three crucial things. First, you've got the Cold War. The West was absolutely terrified that Nasser was getting a little too cozy with the Soviet Union, especially after Egypt bought weapons from Czechoslovakia. Second, there was this powerful wave of Arab nationalism sweeping the region. And third, you have Israel, who had very real security fears because Egypt was blocking its ships and backing guerrilla fighters.
And that wave of Arab nationalism had a name: Pan-Arabism. Nasser wasn't just seen as the president of Egypt, he was the face of this huge movement to unite the entire Arab world and push back against foreign influence. This made him a total hero across the region. And, you can guess, a major threat to Western powers who were used to calling the shots.
So, faced with Nasser's bold move, Britain and France pretty much decided that talking was off the table. They got together with Israel, which, remember, had its own serious problems with Egypt, and they hatched a secret plan. The goal? Take back the canal by force.
The plan was called the Protocol of Sevres, and honestly, it was like a perfectly choreographed piece of political theater. It was a three-step dance. Step 1. Israel would invade Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Step 2. Britain and France would swoop in, acting all concerned, and issue an ultimatum demanding both sides back away from the canal. And Step 3. When Egypt, of course, refused, Britain and France would invade, claiming they were just peacekeepers, there to separate the two sides, all while seizing the canal for themselves. So, the plan was set in motion. The invasion began. But the plotters, they had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They had totally underestimated how the world's new superpowers were going to react.
And things moved fast. I mean, really fast. On October 29th, Israel storms into the Sinai, just like they planned. Just 2 days later, British and French bombers are hitting Egyptian airfields. By November 5th, their paratroopers are on the ground. From a purely military standpoint, it looked like it was working.
But then came the shocker. The United States and the Soviet Union, the two great arch-rivals of the Cold War, suddenly found themselves on the same side. President Eisenhower in the U.S. was furious at his own allies for doing this behind his back, and he threatened to basically crush the British economy. And at the exact same time, the Soviets were threatening to launch rocket attacks on London and Paris. Incredible.
Eisenhower himself made the American position crystal clear. He didn't see this as some justified military action. No, he saw it as a desperate, last-gasp attempt by old empires to cling to their colonial past. And America was having none of it. The message was unmistakable. That era was over.
Well, under that kind of immense pressure from both superpowers, the invasion just collapsed. Britain and France were forced into this incredibly humiliating withdrawal, and in the aftermath, the political map of the world was changed for good.
So let's look at the final scorecard here, because it's pretty stark. For Britain and France, it was a disaster, a humiliating political defeat that shattered their global prestige. For Nasser and Egypt, even though they lost on the battlefield, it was a massive political victory. Nasser became a living legend in the Arab world. And the real winners? The USA and the USSR. They were now the main power brokers in the Middle East, period.
The long-term legacy here is just profound. I mean, this was the final nail in the coffin for European imperialism. It led to the creation of the very first large-scale UN peacekeeping force. And, most importantly, it cemented the USA and the USSR as the two undisputed global superpowers. The world was now truly bipolar, dominated by Washington and Moscow.
So, we'll leave you with this thought. The Suez Crisis was one of those incredibly rare moments where bitter enemies actually found common ground to stop a war from escalating. Which really makes you wonder, right? In our much more complex, multipolar world of today, could something like that kind of powerful consensus, ever happen again?